Hi everyone, welcome to Azad Revenge Stories channel. My name is Tessa Rodis. I am 32 years old, and that day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The air at the countryside estate in Ohio carried the scent of wildflowers and champagne. Guests filled every seat. The band played softly, and sunlight filtered through the wooden windows, painting everything with a warm glow. Snorts, everything seemed perfect except for the three empty chairs in the front row. When the music stopped, I realized my family still had not arrived. I kept telling myself they must be on their way. Maybe caught in traffic. Maybe something unexpected happened. Logan, my husband, waited at the altar with a calm smile that barely hid his concern. His eyes met mine, gentle but anxious. The wedding coordinator leaned in to ask if we should begin, but I shook my head. I said we would wait. I did not want to start without them. Time passed slowly, each minute heavier than the one before. The whispers grew among the guests. Some looked at me with pity, others with curiosity. I held my bouquet tightly, my hands trembling. Every second felt like another small crack forming inside my chest. Then, just as the sun began to fade, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart leapt. A car stopped at the gate. It was my parents' car, and Camille, my sister, stepped out with them. They were laughing, chatting, smiling as if nothing had gone wrong. Camille's hair shone under the light, her sunglasses catching every reflection. She walked ahead confidently, surrounded by friends I had never met, as though she were arriving at a celebration of her own. The crowd went silent. Logan's expression changed from confusion to disappointment. My stomach twisted. But the worst part was not her entourage. It was the words Camille spoke next, the ones that turned my wedding day into a memory I would never forget. What would you do if your own family showed up hours late to your wedding? Tell me in the comments. Long before the wedding, there were signs I chose to ignore. My child at home sat on a quiet street in the suburbs of Ohio, a place where the lawns were neatly trimmed and every evening smelled faintly of laundry detergent and cut grass. My father, Richard, worked long hours as an electrical engineer. My mother, Nancy, managed a small family-owned restaurant downtown. On paper, we looked like a perfect family, but perfection often hides the cracks that shape who we become. From as early as I can remember, Camille was the center of everything. She had a voice that filled every room and a presence that drew people in. My mother adored that about her, calling her our little star whenever guests came over. When Camille spoke, everyone listened. When I tried to add something, the conversation drifted past me as if I were invisible. At first, I thought that was just how families worked, that some people were meant to shine brighter than others. By the time I was in my teens, I had already learned my place. My father came home tired, often with his briefcase still open while the television played softly in the background. He rarely intervened when Camille and I argued. If she raised her voice, he would sigh and say nothing. If I cried, he would pat my shoulder and tell me not to make things worse. Silence became the rhythm of our home, and I learned to adapt to it. My mother had a way of praising Camille that sounded like criticism directed at me. When I got an A on a science test, she smiled and said, "Camille did it first." When I made the soccer team, she reminded me that Camille had been captain when she was my age. Every success of mine felt borrowed, as if I were walking a path already paved by someone else. I stopped competing, not because I could not keep up, but because I was tired of proving that I deserved to exist in the same room. Chores became my quiet territory. I washed dishes while Camille rehearsed for her school play. I folded laundry while she prepared for another debate competition. My mother said it was good for me to be helpful and humble. I told myself that maybe she was right, that being useful was another kind of love. It took me years to understand that it was just another way to stay out of the way. There were moments when I tried to bridge the distance. Once I asked Camille to help me with a project. She laughed and said she did not have time for something so simple. My mother overheard and told me not to take it personally. "Your sister is busy with bigger things," she said, as if that excused everything. I remember going back to my room and staring at the ceiling, wondering why it felt wrong to want attention from my own family. My father's silence became the backdrop of every conflict. When he did speak, his words carried no weight. "You girls will figure it out," he often said, then disappeared behind his newspaper. The unspoken rule was that peace was more important than fairness. And in our house, peace meant pretending. I learned that lesson so well it followed me into adulthood. Looking back now, I can see how much of myself I lost trying to be the quiet one. I told myself that love meant patience, that being unseen meant being good. Every smile I forced, every apology I made for things that were not my fault shaped the woman I became. My mother's approval always dangled just beyond reach, and Camille's shadow stretched over everything I tried to build. Back then, I thought silence kept the family together. I understand now. It only kept me small. Those years taught me how to endure, how to wait, how to shrink myself to fit the space I was given. And that belief that peace meant quiet would come back to haunt me when the same silence returned on my wedding day. 3 months before the wedding, Camille called for the first time in years. Her voice came through the phone with an unsettling brightness, too smooth, too familiar for someone who had been absent so long. She said she wanted to help plan my wedding. I hesitated, unsure if this was her way of making peace or simply finding a stage to stand on again. Before I could respond, she added that she had already spoken to our mother and they both thought it would be fun to collaborate. I said it sounded nice, though every instinct in me whispered to be careful. Our mother was thrilled. She called that same night, her voice alive in a way I had not heard for years. She told me how wonderful it was that Camille wanted to be involved, how I should appreciate the gesture, how family moments like these do not happen twice. I listened half smiling, tracing circles on the kitchen counter while Logan poured tea beside me. He raised his eyebrows when I told him what the call was about, but he said nothing. He did not need to. We both knew what help usually meant in my family. A few days later, Camille sent a list of suggestions. It came as a long email filled with links to luxury venues in downtown Columbus, floral designers, catering options, and even a stylist she claimed could elevate the look. Her tone was polished, professional, almost persuasive. "A city venue," she wrote, "would better reflect your new life." I stared at the screen for a while, reading the sentence again and again. It was beautiful, but it was not me. I had already chosen a countryside estate near the river, quiet and simple, surrounded by oak trees and golden fields. It was a place where I felt calm. I wrote back politely thanking her, but explaining that Logan and I wanted to keep the ceremony small and personal. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "You really should listen to your sister. She knows what looks elegant." The words stung more than I expected. I told her I was happy with our plans. She sighed, said I was being stubborn, and ended the call abruptly. That small exchange set a familiar ache in my chest, the same kind I had felt so many times growing up whenever I dared to choose differently. Logan noticed I was quiet that evening. We sat together on the porch, watching the light fade over the garden. He reached over, took my hand, and said softly, "You don't owe anyone control over your wedding, Tess. It's supposed to be your day." His voice carried a steadiness that grounded me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I nodded, promising myself that I would not let this become another battle. But battles in my family never announced themselves. They began quietly with small remarks and polite smiles that later twisted into something heavier. Over the following weeks, Camille called more often. She said she had connections who could get discounts on decorations, that she knew a friend who could design invitations better than the ones I ordered. Each suggestion came wrapped as a favor, but behind it was a subtle insistence that my choices were not enough. I started to feel watched even from afar. Vendors began calling to confirm updates that I had never made. The florist mentioned changes to the bouquet design that I had not requested. The venue manager emailed me about a new lighting setup that someone else had approved. When I traced the thread back, it always led to Camille. She had started contacting people directly, introducing herself as helping with the bride's coordination. Logan grew frustrated, offering to step in, but I told him not to. I did not want to turn our wedding into a war zone. Instead, I sent Camille a short message thanking her for her enthusiasm, but asking her to let me handle things from now on. Her reply was instant and sharp. "I was only trying to make sure you don't embarrass yourself." I stared at the words for a long time, the old wound inside me opening once more. That night, I deleted the email chain and told Logan we would keep everything small, private, and simple, just like we had planned. I did not tell him how uneasy I felt or how certain I was that Camille was not done. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew this was just the beginning. A week before the wedding, everything started to feel off. It began with a photo Camille posted online. She stood in front of a mirror wearing a long white gown, her hand delicately touching her hair. The caption reading, "Can't believe it's almost here." Within hours, dozens of comments flooded in heart emojis, congratulations, and people assuming she was the bride. I stared at my screen in disbelief. I sent her a private message, trying to keep my tone calm. "Camille, could you take that photo down? People think you're me." Her reply came within seconds. "Relax. It's just a dress." No apology, no explanation. Just those 5 words that carried the same coldness she'd used all my life. My chest tightened, and before I could type anything else, she changed her profile picture to another shot from the same fitting. When I told my mother, she dismissed it with a laugh. "She's just excited. Sweetheart, you know how your sister is." I wanted to tell her that was exactly the problem, that Camille always turned excitement into spectacle. But I stopped myself. I was too tired to argue again. My mother's tone made it clear whose feelings mattered more. My father called the next evening. His voice was gentle, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. He said he would come early on the wedding day to help with setup. It sounded like a small promise, but for me it meant everything. After years of silence, even a few hours of his presence felt like an act of care. I thanked him and told Logan that maybe things were finally settling down. But as the days passed and the guest list filled, my father went quiet again. Each call I made went to voicemail. I tried to convince myself he was just busy. Renee, my oldest friend from college, came by a few days before the wedding. She brought coffee and flowers, claiming it was a pre-wedding sanity check. The moment she stepped inside, her expression shifted. "Tess, is everything okay? The energy here feels tense." I laughed it off, but she wasn't convinced. She had always been good at sensing when something was wrong. "Just remember," she said softly, "it's your day, not anyone else's." Her words lingered long after she left. That afternoon, the photographer Miles stopped by to check the lighting around the garden and reception area. While he adjusted his camera settings, Camille appeared out of nowhere wearing a pale silk dress that shimmered in the sun. She walked over to him and asked in a tone too casual to be innocent, "So, do you think I photograph better in natural light or under chandeliers?" Miles hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. I caught his glance toward me, his eyes apologetic. Then I heard Camille's voice dropped to a whisper. "Poor Tesser, she's trying so hard." The words cut sharper than I wanted to admit. Miles pretended not to hear and continued working, but the air had shifted. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if the entire garden had paused to watch. That evening, I stood alone on the porch, the sky fading into a bruised shade of violet. Logan came out and asked if I was okay. I nodded, though the truth sat heavy in my throat. Something inside me knew the calm would not last. I could feel the edges of the storm gathering, and for the first time, I wondered if my wedding would even feel like mine. When the wooden doors opened, I thought relief would come. It didn't. The ceremony had already been delayed for 2 hours. Guests shifted in their seats, fanning themselves with folded programs. The once lively chatter had turned into restless murmurs. The band had stopped playing half an hour earlier, their instruments resting silently beside the stage. The air inside the hall felt thick, like a shared breath that refused to release. I tried to smile at Logan, but my lips felt heavy, my cheeks stiff. He reached for my hand, squeezing gently, and that simple gesture was the only thing that kept me from walking away. Then the sound of car doors echoed from outside. Heads turned, my chest tightened as I saw them through the open archway. Snorts. Camille entered first, her hair styled like she was walking a runway, followed by my parents and a small group of her friends. They were laughing as they came in, talking loudly as though they had walked into a party, not a ceremony that had been waiting on them for hours. My mother waved at the guests with an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father avoided my gaze entirely. Camille stopped near the aisle, glancing around as if inspecting the decor. "Cute place," she murmured loud enough for several guests to hear. The words weren't cruel on their own, but the smirk that followed turned them into something sharp. A few guests exchanged glances. I felt every pair of eyes darting between us. Logan's hand tightened again. We finally began. The officiant's voice trembled slightly as he welcomed everyone, the tension in the air almost visible. My father was supposed to read a short blessing before the vows. He stood up, unfolding the small paper he had kept in his pocket. His hands shook slightly as he read the first line. Just as he began to speak, a loud clatter broke the silence. One of Camille's friends had dropped her phone onto the wooden floor. The sound bounced across the room like a slap. She bent down to pick it up, whispering an apology through a giggle. Camille laughed too, trying to make light of it. And suddenly the moment I had dreamed of for years felt cheap, like a scene being ruined in real time. My father's voice faltered. He glanced at me, then at my mother, and continued his words barely audible. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. When he finished, my mother stood up to smooth the tension. "It's such a beautiful day," she said softly, smiling toward Camille as if asking for her approval. Camille tilted her head and smiled back, that same knowing look that always made me feel small. Logan stayed silent beside me. His eyes were calm, but I could sense the anger he refused to show. The officiant invited us to say our vows. I turned to Logan, and for a brief moment the room disappeared. His eyes were steady, grounding me. I started to speak, my voice quivering but sincere. The guests leaned in, listening. It might have been peaceful if not for the sound of someone whispering near the back. Camille was leaning toward one of her friends, muttering something, and they both laughed quietly. My stomach twisted. The officiant glanced nervously in her direction, but said nothing. I pushed through the rest of my vows. Logan spoke his next, his voice low and sure, and I almost believed that everything would be fine. But as the rings were being brought forward, Camille stood. The scraping of her chair made everyone turn. She smiled widely, eyes glittering under the chandelier, and said something that made the entire room freeze. The sound of her words didn't fully reach me. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Conversation stopped. Someone dropped their champagne glass. The silence that followed was complete, heavy, unbearable. Logan turned to me, his expression blank, his jaw clenched. I could feel my own face draining of color, my pulse echoing in my ears. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the words Camille had chosen to say would change everything. 2 days later, an email from Miles landed in my inbox. The subject line contained only one-word: footage. For a moment, I thought he was just sending a few extra photos from the wedding. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, unsure whether to open it. Curiosity won. Inside was a short message. "I thought you should see this before I delete it." Attached below was a single video file titled "Behind the Scenes." Logan was sitting beside me, his arm resting along the back of my chair, reading the message over my shoulder. We exchanged a quiet glance, the kind that carried more meaning than words could manage. I clicked play. The screen flickered to life with a shaky shot of the garden before the ceremony. Chairs were being arranged. Ribbons fluttered in the breeze. Guests moved lazily through sunlight. Then the camera turned toward the entrance. Camille stood there with her friends, dressed early, radiant, and poised as if it were her own show. Her laughter cut through the background noise, clear and confident. "Let's make this the wedding no one forgets," she said, tossing her hair as the others laughed. It wasn't playful. It was deliberate. In the corner of the frame, my mother stood near a column, adjusting her bracelet. She didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't even look uneasy. When Camille repeated her line louder, my mother smiled. A small knowing smile, the kind that confirmed she had heard and didn't mind. Something inside me curled tight. It wasn't just Camille's cruelty that hurt. It was my mother's silence. Logan leaned in, his brows furrowing. "She knew," he said softly. His tone wasn't surprised, only tired. I couldn't look at him. I replayed the line again, hearing Camille's voice echo through the room, sharp and confident, each word a fresh wound. The video continued, showing fragments of moments before the ceremony. Camille adjusted her lipstick, posing in front of the mirror. "At least the cheap lights will make me stand out," she muttered, earning laughter from her friends. I paused the clip. My stomach twisted as I stared at the frozen frame of her smiling face. Logan asked gently, "Do you want to send this to them?" His question carried another meaning. Did I really want to open that door again? I hesitated, then nodded. Some part of me still clung to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding, that someone would finally take my side. I forwarded the video to my mother with a single line: "I think you should see this." Then I waited. The minutes turned to hours. When her reply came, it was one sentence: "You're overreacting." I read it out loud, my voice trembling. Logan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. My phone felt heavier than before. I started typing. "You were there. You heard her." Then I deleted it. What was the point? My mother had always chosen peace, but it was never peace for me. It was the kind of peace that meant pretending nothing was wrong. I stood and walked to the window. The sky over the Ohio River was gray, the air thick with the kind of stillness that felt like waiting for rain that never came. Logan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. His warmth was steady grounding, yet I felt something inside me fade. "I think I'm done trying," I whispered. The words slipped out quietly, but once said they felt final. For years, I had tried to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. Watching that video, hearing my mother's voice dismiss me again, I understood that the bond I kept fighting for had broken long ago. I walked back to the desk, closed the laptop, and deleted the email. The sound of the fan filled the silence. Logan kissed the side of my head and said nothing. The house felt still but not empty. I breathed in slowly, realizing that this moment, this quiet, painful clarity wasn't loss. It was release. By Friday, I drove back to my parents' house. The road stretched long and empty, and the closer I got, the heavier the air became. The white fences, the trimmed hedges, the mailbox with peeling paint. Nothing had changed. Yet everything felt foreign. I parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a while, watching the curtains move slightly in the living room window. Someone was home. I wasn't sure if that comforted me or made it worse. When I finally stepped inside, the scent of lemon polish and coffee filled the hallway. My father was sitting in his armchair reading the newspaper, as if it could shield him. He looked up startled, then immediately lowered his eyes. "Tesser," he said quietly, folding the paper with careful precision. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her expression tight, her movements brisk. "We didn't expect you," she said. I could hear the tremor behind her composure. Camille appeared a moment later, barefoot, phone in hand, smiling like nothing had happened. "Wow, look who's back," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "You always make yourself the victim. Maybe try letting it go for once." Her words sliced through the room like cold air. I took a slow breath and placed my bag on the table. "I didn't come to argue," I said. "I came to show you something." My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. I pulled out my phone, opened the video Miles had sent, and pressed play. The sound of laughter filled the quiet house. Camille's laughter. The words that had haunted me all week echoed again. "Let's make this the wedding no one forgets." The screen showed her friends laughing, my mother standing nearby, smiling faintly. For a few seconds, no one spoke. My mother's hand rose to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened. Camille's smirk faltered. I watched their faces more than the screen. Every reaction told a different story. Shock, guilt, shame, denial. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. I stopped the video halfway through and looked up. "Do you remember this?" I asked quietly. "Because I do. I remember every minute of that day. I remember waiting for you, thinking maybe something happened, and then watching you walk in, laughing like it was all a joke." My mother shook her head, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Tesser, I didn't know," she whispered. My father ran a hand over his face, his voice low. "We should have stopped it." Camille said nothing. Her eyes stayed on the floor, shoulders drawn inward as if she could shrink out of view. For a long moment, no one moved. The clock ticked in the background, loud and relentless. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my bag. "You weren't late," I said softly, meeting Camille's eyes. "You were cruel." She flinched, and I saw my mother's tears spill over. My father stood reaching out as if to say something, but I stepped back before he could. "It's okay," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I just needed to say it once. Not to hurt you, not to fight, but to stop carrying it." I turned toward the door. The floorboards creaked beneath my shoes, the same sound they had made all my childhood. But it felt different now, lighter somehow. As I stepped outside, the evening air met me like a release. The weight that had lived in my chest for years began to lift, leaving only quiet. I didn't look back. For the first time, I didn't need to. A year later, Ohio's cold winters didn't feel heavy anymore. The air still carried the same sharp bite, but it no longer settled in my chest. Life had quieted, softened in its own rhythm. Logan and I had opened a small wedding photography studio near Lake Erie, a place where the water reflected every color of the sky. We called it Lighthouse Studio, a name that reminded us of how light could find its way through even the darkest days. The mornings began with the sound of gulls outside and the aroma of coffee brewing in the back room. Logan handled most of the editing while I took the portraits. Sometimes when couples posed under the golden afternoon light, I caught myself smiling at their joy, not with envy, but with peace. I had once feared that my own wedding memories would haunt me forever, but now they felt like something distant, faded like an old photograph tucked safely away. Camille's name surfaced one afternoon in an industry email chain. Someone had forwarded a thread about a PR firm losing several contracts after a leaked video embarrassed a key executive. The clip was short but unmistakable. Camille laughing, tossing her hair, repeating those same words. "Let's make this the wedding no one forgets." It had quietly made its way through the event and media circles. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't feel revenge, just a strange stillness. Life had done the confronting for me. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived. My mother's handwriting covered the front, looping and careful. Inside was a letter several pages long. She wrote about guilt, about sleepless nights, about the way she kept hearing my voice that day. She said she finally understood that silence could wound as deeply as words. Tucked behind it was a small note from my father. Just one line. "I'm sorry for being silent." I read it once, then again, then folded the pages and placed them in a wooden box beneath my desk. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was closure, a gentle pause rather than an ending. Renee visited one Saturday afternoon to help me decorate the new studio space. She brought pastries, fresh paint samples, and her usual energy that filled every quiet corner. We hung soft linen curtains, added potted lavender by the window, and rearranged old photo frames into a mosaic of light. When we finished, she stood back, hands on her hips, and said, "This place feels like you now." We laughed easy and free, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was holding my breath. As evening came, the light dimmed, turning the lake outside into liquid silver. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the world grow calm. Somewhere far away, my family was living their own version of life. Maybe quieter, maybe heavier. I didn't need to know. What mattered was that mine finally felt whole. I used to think cutting family meant hate, but it's choosing peace. I can love them from a distance without letting them hurt me again. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you've ever been hurt by people you love, I hope you found a small piece of strength here. Tell me in the comments what helped you heal or move on. Your words might remind someone that walking away isn't giving up. I invite you to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. Like this video and support me further by hitting the hype button so the story in this video can be heard by many more people. Thanks to all.